the whisper beneath the waves. It begins with silence. Beneath the cold expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, there lies a whisper, a name carried by the tides for over 12,000 years, Atlantis. For some, it is nothing more than a legend born from the imagination of the philosopher Plato. For others, it is a riddle deliberately encoded into history, a fragment of truth buried under layers of myth. Yet across continents and centuries, that single word continues to echo, stirring the same question in the hearts of explorers, scientists, and dreamers alike. What if it was real? According to Plato, Atlantis was a vast island empire greater than Libya and Asia combined, lying beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. It was said to be a realm of unrivaled wealth and knowledge, a place where mountains gleamed with metals unknown to modern science, and where architecture rose in concentric rings of marble and gold. But in a single fateful night, that world vanished beneath the sea. For over 2 millennia, scholars have argued, did Plato invent the story as a moral allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris? Or did he preserve a memory far older than Greece itself, a legend whispered from the priests of Sais in Egypt, who spoke of a lost civilization destroyed by fire and water 9,000 years before Solon's time? What makes Atlantis so powerful is not just the myth of its destruction, it's the implication of its existence. If the story is true, then it pushes the dawn of civilization thousands of years earlier than accepted history allows. It challenges the timeline of human progress, suggesting that an advanced culture flourished long before Sumer, Egypt, or the Indus Valley ever rose. Modern science, of course, has long dismissed the idea. No continent lies sunken beneath the Atlantic. No ruins have been conclusively identified. Yet anomalies persist. Geological formations that defy explanation, submerged structures off the coasts of Cuba, Bimini, and the Azores, and ancient maps like the Piri Reis, which depict lands known long before the Age of Discovery. Could these fragments belong to a civilization lost to cataclysm? Or are they coincidences, mirages interpreted by human imagination? Every myth begins as memory, every legend, a record distorted by time. And so, to uncover the truth of Atlantis, we must trace its origins, from Plato's writings to the oldest Egyptian temples, from the depths of the Atlantic seabed to the secrets buried in polar ice. Because somewhere, hidden beneath 12,000 years of silence, the story of a lost world waits to be heard again. But before we can search for what was lost, we must first understand how the legend began. And that story starts not in the ocean, but in the mind of one man, Plato himself. The Philosopher's Code. How Plato concealed a historical memory. Plato never intended to write a fantasy. When he spoke of Atlantis, he placed it within a dialogue of philosophy, a space reserved not for fiction, but for truth wrapped in reasoning. Yet hidden within those dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, lies something stranger than allegory. It feels like a memory. Plato describes a world precise in geography, politics, and material culture. He speaks of measurements, laws, and architecture with such detail that modern scholars have struggled to dismiss it entirely. The tale, he claimed, was not his own invention. It came from Solon, one of Greece's wisest lawmakers, who had traveled to Egypt around 600 BCE. There, in the temple of the goddess Neith in Sais, Solon met priests who told him of an ancient war between Athens and a powerful island empire that existed 9,000 years earlier. The priests said, "Your records are but children's tales, for you remember but one flood, whereas we remember many." That sentence, "we remember many floods," has haunted historians for centuries. According to Plato, the Egyptian priests preserved a lineage of knowledge that stretched unbroken through the ages, a timeline shattered in Greece by cataclysm after cataclysm. They spoke of an island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, rich in metals and power, whose kings descended from Poseidon himself. Atlantis, they said, was once noble, until pride and conquest corrupted its heart. Then, in a single day and night of misfortune, the earth trembled, the seas rose, and the island disappeared beneath the waves. If Plato had meant to create a parable, why did he use such specific details? Why place Atlantis in a verifiable geographic context west of Gibraltar and link it to Egyptian archives and to Athens itself? Throughout history, skeptics have called it metaphor. But a growing number of researchers, from geologists to linguists, suspect that Plato may have encoded a historical memory passed through generations of oral tradition. Myths, after all, often preserve what written history forgets. To the ancient Greeks, the flood of Deucalion, the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, and the Hebrew story of Noah all spoke of a time when the world drowned. Could these disparate traditions all point back to a real event, a global catastrophe remembered differently across cultures? When Solon returned from Egypt, he intended to record this tale in epic verse, but he died before finishing. 2 centuries later, Plato inherited fragments of the story through his lineage and embedded it in his dialogues as philosophy. Perhaps he did so not only to teach a moral lesson about virtue and decay, but to protect a dangerous truth from ridicule, that humanity's story was far older and far more cyclical than anyone dared to believe. Consider this. Plato dates the fall of Atlantis to around 9600 BCE. Modern science now identifies that same era as the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden global warming and cataclysmic floods triggered by massive glacial meltwater discharges. Sea levels rose more than 400 feet, swallowing coastlines and reshaping continents. Coincidence or memory? It is here, at the intersection of myth and geology, that the modern search for Atlantis truly begins. For if Plato's timeline is not poetic but literal, then the ruins of a lost civilization may lie beneath sediments untouched for 12 millennia. Yet even with Plato's clues, the riddle remains. Where was Atlantis? Was it a mighty island beyond the Atlantic horizon, or a misremembered empire scattered by the flood? The answer lies not in philosophy, but in the earth itself. And that is where we must now go, into the depths of the ocean, the mountains of the Mediterranean, and the scars left by the planet's last great cataclysm. Because somewhere, beneath rock and water, the traces of Plato's island greater than Libya and Asia may still be waiting to be found. The ocean's secret. Searching for a sunken world. The map of the world is a story told in stone. Every ridge, every trench, every volcanic scar beneath the ocean's surface is a chapter written by time and cataclysm. For centuries, explorers have scoured those depths, hoping to find the missing continent that Plato described. Yet what they discovered instead was far stranger. A planet marked by violent shifts, rising seas, and ancient coastlines now lost beneath the waves. The search for Atlantis began in earnest during the Age of Discovery. When sailors crossed the Atlantic for the first time, they encountered islands, the Azores, Madeira, the Canaries, scattered like stepping stones across the ocean. To them, these lands seemed like the shattered peaks of a drowned realm. The Portuguese chroniclers even called the Azores the remains of the ancient Atlantis. In the centuries that followed, science replaced myth with measurement. Oceanography revealed the true shape of the seabed: vast mountain chains, abyssal plains, and a massive rift splitting the Atlantic in two. The mid-Atlantic ridge, stretching from Iceland to the southern seas, looked, at first glance, like the spine of a sunken continent. Could this be the scar of the ancient cataclysm Plato described? In the early 20th century, explorers like Ignatius Donnelly and later Charles Hapgood reignited the question. Donnelly's Atlantis. The antediluvian world argued that the Atlantic once held a great island continent, destroyed by geological upheaval. Hapgood, decades later, proposed Earth crust displacement, a theory suggesting the planet's outer shell can shift suddenly, moving entire continents, a mechanism that could explain both the sinking of Atlantis and the Ice Age extinctions. But mainstream science pushed back. Sonar mapping of the seafloor revealed no continental mass beneath the Atlantic capable of supporting such a civilization. No sunken continent, they said, could vanish so completely. And yet, the anomalies remained. In 1970, marine geologists discovered an unusual plateau near the Azores, the Great Meteor Seamount, a massive underwater mountain topped by a flat summit, suggesting it once lay near the surface. Cores extracted from the site revealed volcanic rock above marine sediment, evidence that part of it may have been exposed above water within the last 12,000 years. 12,000 years, the same epoch Plato described. Meanwhile, strange findings emerged from other corners of the Atlantic world. Off the coast of Bimini, in the Bahamas, divers found a formation of massive limestone blocks resembling an ancient road or harbor wall, soon named the Bimini Road. Though many scientists labeled it a natural formation, its symmetry and precision puzzled others. Could it be the remnant of human construction, now buried under coral and sand? Further east, the Azores Plateau, once thought to be entirely volcanic, has shown signs of ancient erosion patterns inconsistent with deep ocean conditions. Satellite imagery reveals structures resembling channels or terraces, faint but geometric. If these sites are fragments of something greater, then Atlantis may not have sunk in the way we imagine. It may have been partially submerged, fractured by seismic events, and slowly consumed by rising seas after the last glacial melt. Modern geology tells us that between 12,800 and 9,600 BCE, Earth experienced catastrophic transitions, a sudden melting of ice sheets, global flooding, and massive ocean level rise. Entire land bridges vanished. Coastal civilizations, if they existed, would have been erased. And here lies the crucial link. Plato's 9,600 BCE date aligns exactly with the end of the Younger Dryas, a boundary known for global flooding and rapid climate shifts. Coincidence or testimony? If we consider that the Egyptians preserved records older than their own dynasties, and that Solon's story came from them, then perhaps Plato's Atlantis wasn't a moral parable, but a geological memory encoded in myth. Yet to locate it, we must go deeper still, beyond the Atlantic, into the Mediterranean, where other clues, older and stranger, seem to point toward a forgotten civilization that once ruled both land and sea. Because sometimes what sinks is not an island, but an entire chapter of human history. Echoes in stone. The Mediterranean connection. The legend of Atlantis may point west, but its echoes resound in the ancient heart of the Mediterranean. Here, on the shifting boundary between myth and memory, lie ruins that speak of cities devoured by sea and flame, places whose destruction mirrored Plato's tale in unsettling detail. Long before sonar and satellites, scholars began to suspect that the origins of the Atlantis story might not be across the ocean at all, but hidden much closer, among the shattered islands of the Aegean Sea. In 1900, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans unearthed the palaces of Knossos on Crete, revealing the sophistication of the Minoan civilization, a culture so advanced that it challenged long-held assumptions about when true civilization began. The Minoans built vast cities with plumbing, writing, frescoes, and global trade networks. They worshipped the bull, a symbol that appears prominently in Plato's account of Atlantis. Their ships ruled the seas, and then, abruptly, around 1600 BCE, they vanished. Nearby, on the volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, lies the smoking gun of that disappearance, one of the largest volcanic eruptions in recorded history. The explosion shattered the island, sent tsunamis across the Aegean, and darkened skies for years. It erased entire cities in a single day, eerily similar to Plato's one day and one night of misfortune. The devastation of Thera and the collapse of the Minoans created a pattern too close to ignore. Could Plato have taken fragments of this real disaster and projected them into a deeper past, turning a Bronze Age tragedy into a prehistoric epic? Some historians believe so, but others argue that Plato's timeline and geography are too precise to confuse with the Aegean. The Minoans were advanced, yes, but not that advanced. Their empire never stretched beyond the Mediterranean, and their destruction came only 1,200 years before Plato, not 9,000. Still, the parallels remain haunting. Even the city plan of Akrotiri, the Minoan settlement buried beneath volcanic ash on Santorini, mirrors the concentric layout described in the Critias. Its streets, drainage systems, and multi-story homes suggest a level of engineering lost after its fall. If the Minoans weren't Atlantis, perhaps they were the echo, the inheritors of knowledge older than their own world. Because myths rarely emerge in isolation, they are reflections, distortions of something remembered. Across the Mediterranean, we find other legends that resonate with Atlantis. The lost city of Tartessos in southern Spain, a wealthy maritime power said to have disappeared beneath the waves. The submerged ruins near Pavlopetri off the coast of Greece, one of the oldest sunken cities ever found, dating back to 5000 BCE, and the mysterious Heracleion, once at the mouth of the Nile, now resting under the sea near Alexandria, a city that literally sank beneath the Mediterranean sands. Each discovery deepens the same question. How many times has the sea rewritten human history? When Plato wrote that the sea in those parts is now impassable and impenetrable because of the shoal of mud, he may have described more than mythic wreckage. That shoal of mud could have been sediment left by a real collapse, an oceanic shelf or delta swallowed by tectonic shifts. And those shifts were not rare. Modern geology confirms that the Mediterranean basin has endured cataclysmic changes. Islands have risen and vanished. Volcanoes like Santorini, Etna, and Stromboli still rumble as reminders of the Earth's volatility. Perhaps Plato's Atlantis was not one island, but a memory of many, fragments of civilizations erased by the same cycle of destruction that has haunted this region for millennia. Still, one element of the riddle remains. Plato was clear that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, beyond Gibraltar, not within the Mediterranean. So if the echoes found here are reflections, where is the source? To find that, we must follow the tectonic scars further west, toward the meeting point of continents, where the Atlantic floor hides clues of upheaval that once reshaped the world. Because if Atlantis truly existed, the evidence must still whisper from the bedrock of the Earth itself, the shattered continent, geological clues beneath the Atlantic. If we strip away the poetry of Plato and look only at the planet itself, a strange pattern emerges, a geological mosaic that may hold the silent record of a world lost to the sea. The Atlantic Ocean, though ancient, was not always as we know it. Beneath its dark waters lies a rift, a vast wound in the Earth's crust, called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It stretches for nearly 10,000 miles, splitting the ocean in two like a scar left by titanic forces. Around it, seamounts rise like the broken spines of drowned mountains. Volcanic islands, the Azores, Madeira, the Canaries, and Cape Verde dot its length like the last breath of a vanished landmass. When early oceanographers first mapped the ridge in the mid-20th century, some believed they had found the physical proof of Atlantis. It seemed to match Plato's description, a high plateau once above water, now sunken, lying beyond the Pillars of Heracles. But as data improved, it became clear that the ridge was not a sunken continent. It was the result of seafloor spreading, new crust forming as tectonic plates drift apart. Yet not everything fits so neatly into textbook explanations. Geologists studying cores from the Azores Plateau, a massive volcanic structure along the ridge, found evidence that parts of it may have been above sea level during the late Pleistocene, roughly 12,000 to 14,000 years ago. If accurate, that would place subaerial exposure precisely at the time Plato claimed Atlantis sank. More intriguingly, the plateau's basaltic layers contain signs of rapid subsidence, as though large sections of crust collapsed abruptly, not over millions of years, but within geological instants. Could such an event have produced a sudden flooding of land? Modern plate tectonics explains that the North Atlantic region is seismically active, capable of sudden vertical shifts. A massive earthquake or volcanic eruption could indeed cause islands to sink partially, especially if combined with rising post-glacial seas. And that brings us to the Younger Dryas boundary, the end of the last ice age, around 9600 BCE, when global temperatures spiked, glaciers melted, and sea levels rose by more than 400 feet. For decades, this was seen as a slow process, but new studies suggest the transition may have been punctuated by violent surges, floods so immense they could reshape continents in days. One theory, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, proposes that a fragmented comet struck the northern hemisphere around 12,800 years ago, igniting fires, melting ice sheets, and unleashing worldwide deluges. Layers of microspherules, shocked quartz, and platinum found across North America, Europe, and the Middle East seem to support a catastrophic event. If such an impact occurred, its effects would have been apocalyptic. Coastal civilizations, if they existed, would have been annihilated, their lands swallowed as oceans rose and tectonic plates convulsed. The one day and one night of misfortune that Plato described would no longer sound like myth. It would be history seen through survivor memory. Satellite bathymetry now shows vast, submerged terraces and ancient river channels around the Azores, Canaries, and Caribbean basin, evidence of former shorelines now hundreds of feet below the waves. Were these simply natural coastal shelves, or were they once home to human settlements, later erased by the rising seas? In 2018, sonar surveys west of the Straits of Gibraltar detected peculiar geometric anomalies, rectilinear patterns too regular for typical geology. Some researchers linked them to faulted rock. Others quietly wondered if they were ruins buried under silt, awaiting the eyes of future explorers. What is undeniable is that between 12,000 and 9,000 BCE, Earth underwent a transformation so violent that it left cultural scars across every continent. Flood myths multiplied, from the Sumerians to the Maya, from the Egyptians to the tribes of the Andes. Each spoke of a time when the world drowned and knowledge was lost. Perhaps Plato's Atlantis was the memory of that global trauma, a synthesis of many local destructions woven into a single archetypal event. Or perhaps it was literal, the chronicle of a high civilization that thrived along coasts now buried beneath the Atlantic's shifting floor. The rocks do not lie, but they speak in a language humanity is only beginning to understand. And as our instruments grow sharper, sonar, submersible, satellite, the shadows of structures long forgotten begin to take shape. If we dare to listen, the Atlantic may yet reveal the voice of the world before history. The Great Melt, how the end of the Ice Age drowned the world. It began with ice. For over 100,000 years, vast sheets of frozen water covered the northern hemisphere. Glaciers stretched across North America, Europe, and Asia, locking away oceans and shaping the world's climate. Sea levels were lower by hundreds of feet, revealing coastlines and land bridges now long vanished. Humanity, sparse, resilient, and scattered, lived along those ancient shores, unaware that their world stood on the edge of destruction. Then, around 12,800 BCE, the ice began to die. The cause remains one of the most debated mysteries in modern science. Some believe it was the gradual rhythm of Earth's orbit, a natural warming phase. Others argue for something far more sudden, an impact from the heavens. Evidence for that impact lies buried in the soil of continents far apart. In North America, scientists have discovered a thin layer of black sediment known as the Younger Dryas boundary layer, filled with microscopic spherules, melted glass, and rare elements like iridium and platinum, all markers of intense heat and cosmic origin. Similar layers appear in Europe, the Middle East, and even South America. If true, it means that a cometary swarm struck Earth roughly 12,800 years ago, igniting massive wildfires, vaporizing ice sheets, and sending shock waves across the globe. In mere days, rivers became oceans. The atmosphere darkened with ash. Temperatures plummeted, then surged. The Ice Age ended not with a slow thaw, but with a planetary convulsion. Glacial meltwater poured into the oceans, raising sea levels by more than 400 feet over the next millennium. Entire continental shelves vanished. The English Channel flooded. The Bering Land Bridge connecting Asia and America disappeared. The Caribbean Basin and Gulf of Mexico expanded, and somewhere, perhaps along the mid-Atlantic ridge, perhaps in the now submerged plains off Spain, or even in the Caribbean, any coastal civilization would have been obliterated. Plato's date for the fall of Atlantis, around 9600 BCE, marks the final pulse of this catastrophe, the very end of the Younger Dryas. In geological terms, it was the most violent transition of the last 100,000 years. For archaeologists, this period has long been a dark gap, a global reset between the hunter-gatherer world of the Pleistocene and the sudden rise of agriculture and monumental architecture in the early Holocene. But what if that reset was not an accident of nature? What if it was the aftermath of a collapse, the ruin of a forgotten age? Across the world, ancient myths tell of this same deluge. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim survives the flood sent by angry gods. In India, Manu is warned by a divine fish to build a boat. In the Americas, the Hopi speak of a world cleansed by water. And in Egypt, the priests of Sais told Solon that the world had been destroyed by fire and flood many times before. Could all these stories preserve the memory of the same event, a prehistoric apocalypse that ended the last global civilization? If so, the survivors would have scattered, carrying fragments of their knowledge into the mountains and deserts. They would have become the seed-bearers of new cultures, the founders of myths, and perhaps among them were the ones remembered as the gods who came after the flood, teachers, architects, and sages. Geologists call it the Meltwater Pulse 1A, a sudden rise of nearly 65 feet in sea level within only a few centuries. The oceans surged inland, devouring everything humans had built along the ancient coasts. Today, sonar scans reveal submerged landscapes, ancient river valleys, forests, and plains, beneath the North Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Bay of Bengal, and the Gulf of Mexico. Archaeologists have found stone tools and structures resting hundreds of feet below modern tides. If these sites were once thriving communities, then the end of the Ice Age was not just environmental, it was civilizational. Plato's one day and one night of misfortune might have been the poetic echo of a global disaster, a trauma carved into human memory so deeply that every culture retold it, each in its own language. The Great Melt did not merely change the Earth, it changed history itself, because when the seas rose, they didn't just drown land, they drowned evidence. And what remains now is the faint whisper of a world erased by water, awaiting rediscovery beneath 12,000 years of silence. But if Atlantis truly perished in the flood, the question remains, who were its people, and what legacy did they leave behind before the waves came? The people of the deep, tracing the lost civilization before the flood. If Atlantis truly existed, then it was not merely an island, it was a people. And if those people perished in the cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age, then traces of their existence should still echo across the surviving cultures of the ancient world. But who were they? Plato described the Atlanteans as powerful, ingenious, and deeply spiritual. Their empire, he wrote, was divided into 10 kingdoms, each ruled by a son of Poseidon and a mortal woman named Cleito. They built their capital in concentric rings, alternating circles of land and sea, surrounded by high mountains and fertile plains. They possessed a mastery of engineering, agriculture, and navigation that, to the Greeks, bordered on divine. It's easy to dismiss such grandeur as mythology until one looks closely at the early archaeological record, because around 12,000 years ago, humanity seems to have awakened suddenly from its prehistoric slumber. Stone monuments, agriculture, astronomy, and organized religion appear out of nowhere, not as gradual inventions, but as legacies reborn. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Built around 9,500 BCE, it is the oldest known megalithic site on Earth, 12,000 years old, older than Stonehenge by 7 millennia. Massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 50 tons, are arranged in circular enclosures, just as Plato described the Atlantean city built in rings. The carvings at Göbekli Tepe depict animals not native to that region after the Ice Age, as if they were memories from an earlier world. The precision and complexity of its design imply a social and intellectual structure far beyond what hunter-gatherer tribes were believed capable of. Then, across the globe, patterns begin to repeat. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo fit together with uncanny precision, megalithic blocks so finely joined that a blade cannot pass between them. In Bolivia, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku display engineering that modern masons still struggle to explain. In Egypt, the sudden emergence of monumental stone architecture around 3000 BCE suggests inherited knowledge, as if the builders were reviving techniques from a forgotten age. Even their myths speak of a pre-dynastic epoch, the Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among men and built the foundations of civilization. Could these gods have been survivors of a lost world? Refugees from Atlantis who carried fragments of their culture across continents after the flood? It's a theory whispered by explorers and researchers from the 19th century to today, from Ignatius Donnelly to Graham Hancock, each proposing that global similarities in architecture, symbolism, and myth stem from a common source older than recorded history. The parallels are unsettling. The pyramid, a recurring form on every continent. The worship of the sun and stars as divine guides. The concept of a golden age destroyed by flood and fire. The sudden, simultaneous birth of agriculture and astronomy around 10,000 BCE. These are not random coincidences. They form a pattern, one that points back to a civilization that once spanned oceans. If that civilization was Atlantis, then its people were not gods, but survivors, engineers, astronomers, and sailors whose memory became divine in the eyes of those who came after. They may have carried the seeds of knowledge to the Nile Valley, to the Indus River, to the Andes, and across the Pacific to islands where legends still speak of ancestors who came from the sea. Even in the Americas, ancient myths recall tall, pale-skinned, bearded strangers who arrived after a great flood, teaching the arts of agriculture, architecture, and writing. The Incas called him Viracocha. The Maya knew him as Kukulkan. In Mesopotamia, he was Oannes, the amphibious sage from the sea. Different names, same archetype. What if all these were fragments of the same memory, the memory of the Atlanteans? Archaeology may not yet have uncovered their cities, but the fingerprints of their culture are etched into the myths of humanity itself. If so, then Atlantis never truly died. It was reborn in pieces, scattered across time, rebaptized by every civilization that rose from its ashes. But what did these people know that allowed them to build such wonders? And what force could have been powerful enough to erase them almost overnight? The answer may lie in the sky, in a cosmic event so vast that it reshaped the earth, the oceans, and the destiny of mankind itself. Fire from the sky, the cosmic disaster that ended the first civilization. The end did not come from the sea, it came from the sky. Imagine the world 12,800 years ago, a planet of glaciers and green plains, where mammoths roamed beneath auroras and vast coastlines stretched thousands of miles farther than today. Along those coasts, perhaps, the Atlanteans flourished, master builders, astronomers, and navigators who watched the heavens with reverence and fear. And then, one night, the sky ignited. Across the northern hemisphere, a swarm of cometary fragments, debris from a celestial body that had entered our solar system millennia earlier, began to fall upon the Earth. Modern science calls this the Younger Dryas Impact Event, a catastrophe so immense that it scarred the planet and ended an age. At sites from North America to Syria, from Greenland to South America, geologists have found the same signature, a thin black layer rich in melted glass, nanodiamonds, carbon spherules, and platinum, materials forged only under extreme heat, hotter than any natural wildfire could produce. In that instant, forests across continents erupted into flame. The impact or airburst vaporized ice sheets, sending torrents of water surging across the land. Firestorms consumed everything, followed by a night that lasted for years. Dust and soot filled the atmosphere, blocking the sun, collapsing ecosystems, and plunging the world into chaos. The mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths vanished. Human populations crashed. The Ice Age ended in fire and flood, a one-two blow that reshaped the biosphere and erased almost every trace of the civilizations that may have existed along those ancient shores. If Plato's Atlantis perished in a single day and night of misfortune, this was it. For centuries, mainstream science dismissed such an event as fringe speculation. Yet each decade brings new evidence, microscopic markers of cosmic origin distributed across the same global horizon layer. Even Greenland's ice cores record an abrupt rise in platinum at 12,800 years ago, a silent fingerprint of something extraordinary. And if we follow the myths, they too bear witness. The Egyptians spoke of the fire serpent of heaven that scorched the earth before the Nile's first dawn. The Maya told of the sky stone that fell and brought endless rain. The Hopi remember the end of the Third World, a cleansing by fire, followed by water. Even the Vedic texts describe a celestial weapon, a blazing star that destroyed empires of the past. Different voices, one memory, a cosmic firestorm. For the Atlanteans, if they lived along the coastal shelves of the Atlantic, it would have been apocalyptic. Within hours, their harbors would have boiled, their cities drowned by tsunamis, triggered by collapsing ice and quaking earth. Entire regions would have vanished beneath waves hundreds of feet high. The survivors, scattered, broken, and starving, would have fled inland. They would have become wanderers, carrying fragments of their once great knowledge, trying to rebuild in a world turned hostile and cold. Those who witnessed it might have described the sky as angry gods, the ocean as vengeful spirits, the thunder as divine wrath. Over generations, memory became myth, myth became scripture, and Atlantis became the story of humanity's greatest fall. Today, astronomers trace the possible origin of this cataclysm to the torrid meteor stream, a vast field of debris through which Earth still passes twice each year. Within it, fragments as large as mountains still drift, silent reminders of the event that may have ended the world once before. Some scientists even warn that remnants of that same ancient comet still pose a threat, the cycle not yet complete. If true, it means Atlantis's destruction was not random. It was part of a cosmic rhythm, a cycle of impact and renewal that shapes life on Earth. And if ancient civilizations had tracked the heavens, if they knew these cycles, then perhaps their temples, pyramids, and megaliths were not merely monuments, but warnings to us, because the fire that ended them still crosses our sky every year, and one day it will return. But while the heavens brought the end, they may also hold the key to understanding who the Atlanteans truly were, and how much they knew about the cosmos that destroyed them. The astronomers of the lost world, How the Atlanteans read the stars. When the world burned, the stars were the only things that remained. For the survivors of the great cataclysm, the heavens became both compass and scripture, a map of what was lost, and a warning of what could come again. If Atlantis truly existed, its people would have watched the sky not as dreamers, but as scientists. Plato described them as astronomers and engineers, a civilization aligned with cosmic order, a society governed by the stars. Across the ruins of the ancient world, echoes of that knowledge still shine. Look to Egypt, where the Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned with a precision unmatched even by modern builders. Its shafts point directly toward the circumpolar stars and Orion's belt, a constellation the ancients associated with Osiris, the god of resurrection and the afterlife. To the Egyptians, the stars were not distant suns. They were the eternal homeland of the gods, perhaps a poetic echo of a lost civilization that once watched those same stars rise and fall over a different horizon. Far to the west, in Mesoamerica, the Maya tracked the heavens with extraordinary accuracy. Their calculations of the solar year, lunar cycles, and planetary movements rival modern astronomy. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza acts as a solar calendar. Twice each year, at the equinox, a serpent of light descends its stairway as the sun sets. It is as if their builders encoded in stone the rhythm of the cosmos, a message to future generations about time, renewal, and cycles. In Peru, the lines of Nazca stretch across the desert like a celestial chart, some pointing directly to solstices and constellations. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe's pillars seem oriented toward the rising of specific stars, notably Deneb and Cygnus, around 9,500 BCE, the exact era Plato gave for Atlantis's fall. Could all of these have been the legacy of a world that once understood the heavens better than we do today? Modern scholars see these alignments as products of ritual and observation, but the consistency across continents and across millennia suggests a shared origin, a science of the stars passed down from a vanished source. In almost every ancient tradition, the same pattern appears. The 7 sages of Mesopotamia, who came from the sea after the flood, bringing knowledge of astronomy and writing. The Shemsu-Hor of Egypt, the followers of Horus, said to have reigned before the first dynasties. The Viracochas of the Andes, described as pale, bearded wanderers who rebuilt civilization after the waters receded. All of them teachers, all of them sky watchers. If we see these as echoes of Atlantean survivors, then their obsession with the heavens was not mystical, it was practical. They may have understood something we are only rediscovering, that Earth's fate is written in cosmic cycles. Every few millennia, our planet passes through dense regions of debris, the Torrid Complex, a cosmic river of dust and rock left by a disintegrated comet. Within it lie fragments capable of erasing civilizations. The same stream that may have destroyed Atlantis still intersects Earth's orbit today. Perhaps that is why ancient monuments, pyramids, stone circles, megaliths, all serve dual purposes, temples for the gods and observatories for the sky. They record precession, solstice, and equinox. They track the slow wobble of Earth's axis, a 25,920-year cycle the ancients called the Great Year. But how could they have known that without instruments or mathematics, unless they inherited it from those who came before the flood? The Atlanteans may have been the first astronomers, not stargazers of myth, but scientists who understood celestial mechanics and cosmic danger. To them, the heavens were a clock counting down to catastrophe. Their temples were warnings carved in stone, telling of the cycles of destruction that return like clockwork. If so, then humanity has forgotten the message. And now, thousands of years later, we are once again staring into the same sky, tracing the same constellations, unaware that their arrangement may be more than symbolic. It may be historical, because the story of Atlantis is not just about a sunken city. It is the story of memory written in the stars, a cosmic record of of how a civilization once rose to understand the heavens and was destroyed by them. But even as their world fell, something of their knowledge endured, encoded not in stone or star, but in myth itself, the sacred memory. Myths as the last language of Atlantis. When knowledge dies, it does not vanish. It hides in symbols, in songs, in stories. Every ancient myth, from the temples of Egypt to the high plateaus of the Andes, carries a fragment of something older, a memory so ancient that no written record could contain it. Perhaps that is how Atlantis survived, not in stone or artifact, but in the collective memory of humanity. Across the world, myths tell the same story with different names: a golden age of peace and wisdom, a sudden fall caused by pride, corruption, or divine wrath, a great flood that resets the world, and then the rebirth of civilization guided by mysterious teachers who came from the sea. To the Sumerians, they were the Anunnaki, divine beings who descended from the heavens and rebuilt order after the deluge. To the Egyptians, they were the Netjeru, the gods who brought light back to a darkened earth. To the Maya, they were the Itnamna, the elder ones who taught the counting of days and the building of temples. And in every tale, they appear after the same catastrophe, the flood that ended the last world. Could all of these be echoes of the same event and of the same people? In myth, Atlantis did not simply sink, it was punished. The gods, angered by human arrogance, unleashed destruction. But if we strip away the moralism and look deeper, this punishment reads like a warning, a memory of natural law. Civilizations rise and fall in cycles. When they forget their harmony with nature, when they reach too far, the earth reclaims what was hers. Plato's own dialogue hints at this hidden philosophy. Atlantis, he says, was a mirror of divine order, a world built in balance between the spiritual and the material. But when greed overtook wisdom, that balance broke, and nature responded with catastrophe. Perhaps he was not moralizing. Perhaps he was quoting a truth preserved by the Egyptian priests that the world itself remembers. This pattern, the fall, the flood, the rebirth, repeats endlessly in myth. It is not coincidence, it is structure. It is how ancient peoples encoded memory through time. To the initiates of old, myths were not stories, they were keys, designed to transmit truth through the language of symbol long after the facts were forgotten. The serpent, for example, worshipped in Atlantis according to ancient esoteric traditions, reappears as Quetzalcoatl, Ningishzida, Thoth, and Kundalini, always a symbol of wisdom, rebirth, and the eternal cycle. The trident of Poseidon becomes the lightning of Zeus, the scepter of Osiris, the weapon of Shiva, the power to destroy and to renew. Even the idea of the island that sank beneath the sea becomes a metaphor for consciousness descending into matter, for memory drowned by time, and for civilizations lost beneath the tides of history. But while mythology is symbolic, it is not imaginary. Beneath the allegory, traces of real geography persist. The priests of Sais told Solon that the world had been remade many times, that when fire and water consumed humanity, survivors retreated to high ground, preserving fragments of knowledge in temples. Those temples, they said, were built after the model of the first cities. The first cities, the cities of Atlantis. If true, then myth is not the opposite of history. It is history, remembered in a different form. It is the language of memory itself, carrying truths that no empire or chronicle could preserve. And perhaps that is why the Atlanteans, foreseeing their end, chose to encode their wisdom not in fragile matter, but in mythic pattern, a structure of stories that would outlast continents. When their lands drowned, their science became religion, their equations became symbols, and their maps became myths. In this way, Atlantis never died. It became every myth, every story of gods, floods, and rebirth that humanity has ever told. But if myth is the vessel of memory, then its cargo must still exist somewhere, perhaps buried, perhaps waiting to be rediscovered, because even symbols leave shadows, and shadows can be traced. And soon we will follow those shadows from myth to matter as archaeologists uncover structures that seem to defy history itself. Forgotten stones, the megalithic legacy of a lost civilization. Stones do not lie. They endure, long after the people who placed them vanish, long after their words and names have turned to dust. Across the face of the earth, colossal blocks of stone rise from jungles, deserts, and mountains, silent witnesses of a time that modern history cannot explain. They do not fit neatly into any timeline, any known culture, or any accepted origin, and yet they exist. Let us begin in Peru, in the high Andes, where the walls of Sacsayhuaman defy reason. Each stone, some weighing over 300 tons, is cut and fitted with mathematical precision, locked together without mortar, as if softened and fused by unknown technology. The Inca themselves claimed they did not build these walls. They said they were the work of the gods who came before them. In nearby Ollantaytambo, the same craftsmanship appears. Stones perfectly aligned, surfaces polished, smooth as glass, corners carved in ways that mimic modern machining. Transporting these megaliths would be impossible even today without advanced cranes or laser measurement. Yet someone did it thousands of years ago, and Peru is only one chapter of this mystery. In Bolivia, the site of Pumapunku remains an open question in archaeology. Its blocks of andesite and diorite, among the hardest stones on Earth, are carved with millimetric grooves and interlocking joints so precise they look machined. Modern engineers studying them admit we could replicate this, but only with industrial tools. Who, then, built them? The Tiwanaku civilization that occupied the region around 500 CE? Or were they inheritors, rebuilding atop the ruins of something far older? The same enigma repeats in Egypt, where the Great Pyramid's foundation stones weigh up to 80 tons, and the quarry lies miles away. Beneath the sands of Abydos and Saqqara, archaeologists have found granite blocks shaped as if melted, surfaces that suggest a lost technique beyond simple copper chisels. Even the Osirian of Abydos, one of the oldest temples in Egypt, sits deep below later structures, built with blocks eerily similar in style to those of South America, as if both lands once shared the same architectural DNA. From Turkey's Göbekli Tepe to Malta's megalithic temples, from Stonehenge to Baalbek in Lebanon, the pattern repeats. 1. Enormous stones. 2. Unexplainable precision. 3. Sudden disappearance of the builders. 4. Later civilizations reusing the sites as sacred ground. Archaeologists often attribute these anomalies to coincidence, independent cultures finding similar solutions to similar problems. But coincidences do not usually produce identical techniques separated by oceans. Could these structures be the scattered remnants of an earlier global civilization, one that collapsed at the end of the Ice Age, and whose survivors passed fragments of their craft to the peoples who rose after? In Baalbek, Lebanon, the trilithon stones, each weighing more than 1,000 tons, rest perfectly level upon an ancient platform. No modern crane can lift them. The Romans later built a temple atop this base, but even they admitted the foundation was ancient when they arrived. The further one looks, the more the evidence accumulates, not as proof, but as pattern. A pattern of advanced engineering existing before history officially began. If these were indeed the descendants or survivors of Atlantis, their knowledge would have focused on what they knew best, the earth and the heavens. They built not only temples but instruments, calendars of stone aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and celestial cycles. Their architecture was astronomy made physical, and everywhere these megaliths appear, we find the same strange detail. They were built with obsessive precision to withstand time, earthquakes, and flood, as if the builders knew what was coming, as if they had already seen the world destroyed once before. The stones of Earth form a map, scattered across continents, yet whispering the same language: geometry, alignment, and endurance. If Atlantis was the mother civilization, then these megaliths are her children, fragments of a lost memory carved into the bones of the planet. But stones alone cannot tell the full story. To understand who built them and why, we must look beneath them, into the layers of earth and sediment that hide the oldest ruins of all. Because under the soil of our own world, buried under time itself, the next clues await, and they may rewrite everything we know about human history. Buried truths, submerged ruins, and the evidence beneath the seas. The ocean is a graveyard of worlds. More than two-thirds of Earth's ancient coastlines now lie underwater, drowned by the rising seas that ended the Ice Age. If advanced civilizations existed before that flood, then their cities, harbors, and monuments would rest today beneath hundreds of feet of sediment, unseen, unreachable, and forgotten. For centuries, legends of sunken cities were dismissed as fantasy. But over the last few decades, technology has begun to change that. Sonar, submersibles, and satellite mapping now reveal a hidden world beneath the waves, a world that looks disturbingly man-made. Let us begin off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay. In 2001, a team from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology detected vast geometric structures nearly 120 feet below the surface. Walls, platforms, and grids stretching for miles. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts recovered from the site suggested an age of 9,000 years or more, centuries before the rise of Mesopotamia or Egypt. If accurate, this would make it one of the oldest known urban settlements on Earth. A few hundred miles away, near Dwarka, divers discovered submerged stone structures aligned in straight avenues, leading outward toward the sea, eerily matching ancient Hindu texts describing a legendary city that shone beneath the waves. Across the globe, off the coast of Japan, lies another enigma, the Yonaguni Monument. Discovered in 1986, it consists of massive terraces, steps, and platforms carved into solid sandstone, descending more than 80 feet underwater. The angles are too precise to be natural. Perfect right corners, level surfaces, and geometric alignments that suggest deliberate construction. Geologists remain divided. Some insist it is a natural formation. Others argue it bears every hallmark of human design, eroded over thousands of years. But even if Yonaguni was shaped by both nature and man, its age and location suggest it was once dry land during the last glacial period, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower. If people lived there then, they were far more sophisticated than our history books allow. Further west, off the Bahamas, another riddle rests beneath shallow waters, the Bimini Road. Discovered in 1968, the same year that psychic Edgar Cayce predicted the rising of Atlantis near Bimini, it consists of enormous limestone blocks forming a straight paved pathway that extends for nearly half a mile. Skeptics call it a natural beach rock formation, fractured by erosion, but others point to its uniform width, right angles, and the fact that it lies along an ancient shoreline, precisely where land once met sea 12,000 years ago. The Caribbean holds more secrets still. In 2001, sonar scans off the coast of Cuba, near the Guanahacabibes Peninsula, revealed a vast area of symmetrical stone formations nearly 2,000 feet underwater, resembling pyramids and avenues. The discovery, made by the Canadian team of Polina Zalitsky and Paul Weinsweig, caused a storm of controversy. If real, those structures would be at least 10,000 years old, submerged when the last great floods swallowed the coasts of the world. Yet, after a brief burst of attention, the site vanished from public discourse, quietly classified, quietly forgotten. Why? Perhaps because such discoveries do not fit the accepted story of civilization, a story that begins in Sumer and Egypt, not beneath the sea. But the pattern cannot be ignored. From Japan to India, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean, we find the same anomalies, sunken structures that date to the very window Plato described, between 12,000 and 9,000 years ago. Each discovery whispers the same refrain: something was here before us. Oceanographers now estimate that over 20 million square miles of former land lie underwater, a vast archive of prehistory we have barely begun to explore. And within those drowned landscapes may rest the ruins of entire cultures, cities erased by the flood and remembered only in myth. If these submerged ruins are indeed the remnants of Atlantis, then our planet's oceans are not just water, they are memory. They hold the story of what humanity once was, and what it might have been capable of before the Earth itself reset the clock. But the sea is also merciless. It erases more than it preserves. To read its secrets, we must look to the land, to the mountains, deserts, and high plains where the floodwaters never reached, and where survivors might have carried the last spark of Atlantean knowledge. Because somewhere above the tide line, the children of Atlantis may have begun again, building the first temples of a new world. The survivors, the rebirth of civilization. After the flood, when the waters receded, the world was unrecognizable. The coastlines had shifted, the forests had drowned, entire continents bore new scars. But among the survivors, scattered, starving, and grieving, something extraordinary began to stir: memory. If Atlantis truly fell in the cataclysm that ended the Ice Age, its people would not all have perished. Some would have escaped, fleeing to the mountains, the highlands, the deserts beyond the reach of the sea. And wherever they went, the story of their lost world went with them. Across the ancient world, we find sudden bursts of knowledge that seem to appear from nowhere, as if planted by invisible hands. In Egypt, Sumer, the Andes, and the Indus Valley, the same miracle occurs. Agriculture, writing, astronomy, and architecture emerge almost simultaneously, around 10,000 to 4,000 BCE, with no clear developmental path. It is as though someone remembered what the rest of the world had forgotten. The Egyptians called their first age Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods themselves rebuilt the world after the flood. In Mesopotamia, the seven sages, said to have come from the sea, taught humanity to build cities and measure the stars. In the Andes, the god Viracocha emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca, teaching language, agriculture, and stonework. And in Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, arrived after a global deluge to restore civilization and bring light back to the earth. Different names, different lands, but the same story. If we strip away the divine titles, these gods begin to look less like supernatural beings and more like survivors, the bearers of a lost knowledge inherited from an earlier age. They did not invent civilization, they remembered it. Archaeological timelines show something deeply puzzling. Between 9600 and 8000 BCE, as the climate stabilized after the Great Melt, monumental construction appears suddenly in the archaeological record. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Jericho in the Levant, and mysterious sites in Iran and Anatolia all emerge at once, with no known precursors. At Göbekli Tepe, for example, hunter-gatherers who supposedly lacked agriculture or metallurgy somehow erected 20-foot-tall stone pillars aligned to celestial events. Who taught them the art of geometry, of astronomy, of architecture? What inspired them to create an observatory in the dawn of time, and then, inexplicably, bury it? The same question echoes through the early civilizations of the Nile. The earliest dynasties appear almost fully formed, their knowledge of engineering, mathematics, and irrigation already advanced. The Egyptians themselves admitted that their ancestors inherited this wisdom from the followers of Horus, a race of semi-divine beings who ruled long before the first pharaohs. If Atlantis had survivors, perhaps these were they, wanderers bearing the burden of lost memory. In the Americas, the story follows the same rhythm. High in the Andes, the builders of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku claimed descent from gods who rose from the lake after the flood. In Central America, the Maya and Aztec chroniclers described the four suns, four previous ages destroyed by water and fire. Everywhere the pattern holds: destruction, survival, and rebirth. And in every rebirth, there appears a spark of genius, a sudden flowering of architecture, agriculture, and sacred knowledge, far beyond what local populations should have achieved alone. Was this coincidence, or the silent hand of a hidden lineage, the last descendants of Atlantis, preserving what they could in a broken world? Perhaps they knew that their empire was gone forever, but their purpose remained: to ensure that humanity did not forget entirely. They became priests, builders, and astronomers, the seed planters of civilization. Even Plato, in his dialogues, hints that the knowledge of Atlantis reached Egypt long before Solon's visit. The priests told him that the story was ancient even to them, carried from an age when their own ancestors were saved by the wisdom of strangers from the Western Sea. And if that is true, then Atlantis did not merely die. It became the foundation of all that followed, the mother memory encoded in every sacred tradition that rose from the flood's aftermath. The survivors of Atlantis may never have rebuilt their shining empire, but their legacy became humanity's, the spark that lit the first fires of civilization after the darkness of the deep. Yet even as they rebuilt the world, they carried a burden, a warning from the past, because they knew that what had happened once could happen again. The warning of the ancients, cycles of catastrophe, and the memory of fire. Civilizations remember in different ways. Some carve their memory in stone, others in scripture. But the most enduring memories, the ones that survive continents and floods, are those written in time itself. When the survivors of Atlantis scattered across the newborn world, they carried with them more than stories. They carried a warning that what had happened once would happen again. Across the world, the earliest temples and monuments share one obsession: the heavens. They track the sun, moon, and stars not for worship alone, but for rhythm, for a cosmic heartbeat that repeats through eons. To the priests of Egypt, this rhythm was the Zep-Tepi cycle. To the Maya, it was the Great Sun. To the Greeks, it was the age of the world. To modern science, it is known as the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of Earth's axis that completes one revolution roughly every 25,120 years. Every culture, in its own way, spoke of the same cosmic clock, a wheel of ages turning through light and darkness. And in every tradition, the passing from one great age to another is marked by catastrophe. The Maya long count calendar, for example, describes multiple worlds destroyed by water, fire, and stars falling from the sky. The Hindu yugas mirror this precisely: cycles of creation and dissolution, each ending in chaos before the dawn of a new age. Even the Egyptian Book of the Dead warns of celestial serpents of fire that devour worlds when the heavens shift. Could these ancient visions have encoded knowledge of astronomical events, comets, impacts, solar outbursts that repeat in predictable intervals? Modern science, surprisingly, edges toward the same conclusion. Every 12 to 13,000 years, Earth experiences abrupt climate shifts, sudden spikes in temperature, rising seas, and widespread extinction. These events correspond eerily to the half-cycle of precession. The Younger Dryas impact, which may have ended Atlantis, fits that timeline exactly. It is as though our planet breathes in great cosmic intervals, each breath a cycle of life, destruction, and renewal. To the ancients, this was not superstition. It was science expressed through symbol. They built calendars, pyramids, and alignments to record this rhythm, to remind future generations that the heavens are not fixed, and that the same stars which bless can also burn. The Great Pyramid, for instance, aligns not just to the cardinal points, but to specific stars, marking the precessional ages as if it were a geological clock. The Maya did the same, calculating the solar and lunar cycles with such precision that they could predict eclipses thousands of years into the future. Why such obsession with time? Because they had seen what happens when the sky turns against the earth. Even in the Bible, the flood of Noah is followed by a divine promise, a covenant sealed with a rainbow, symbolizing the cycle's end. But beneath that theology lies a natural truth. The earth resets itself, and humanity begins again. Perhaps the Atlanteans, the first scientists of the ancient world, understood this on a scale we are only beginning to rediscover. Perhaps their fall was not simply a punishment for pride, but a cosmic inevitability they foresaw but could not prevent. If so, the myths and monuments they left behind are more than relics. They are messages across time. They tell us that civilization is fragile, that nature is cyclical, and that history is not linear. It spirals, and within that spiral lies the same danger that destroyed them. Every age reaches a point of brilliance and of hubris. Every age forgets its past, believing itself immortal. Then the cycle turns, and the fire returns. The ancients tried to warn us. They aligned their temples to the stars, carved their fears into stone, and encoded their astronomy into myths so it would outlive even language. Because one day, they knew, we would look to the sky again, as they did, and see the same cosmic shadows approaching. The question is, will we understand the message before the next cycle completes? The hidden knowledge. How the ancient mystery schools preserved the Atlantean code. After the flood, memory became religion. Knowledge, once open and scientific, had to be hidden, encoded in symbols, rituals, and allegory to survive the ignorance of a world rebuilding itself from chaos. Those who carried the last remnants of Atlantean wisdom could not reveal it to all. They guarded it, teaching only to the worthy, to those who could understand that truth and power are dangerous in the wrong hands. Thus were born the mystery schools. In Egypt, they called it the House of Life, where priests and initiates studied astronomy, mathematics, geometry, and the science of the soul. These were not separate disciplines. They were one unified vision of the universe, inherited from a time when the physical and the spiritual were not divided. The Temple of Hermopolis, for example, taught that creation began with vibration, with sound shaping matter. The initiates of Heliopolis learned the secrets of the stars and the cycles of the earth, mapping the precession thousands of years before modern astronomy rediscovered it. At Abydos, the sanctuary of Osiris preserved the doctrine of resurrection, the return of spirit after destruction, echoing the Atlantean myth of renewal after the flood. And at the heart of it all stood a figure half historical, half divine. Thoth, the god of wisdom, known to the Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. He was said to have survived the flood and to have preserved the ancient knowledge in sacred books hidden deep beneath the earth, the tablets of Thoth, the emerald tablet, the wisdom of the first time. The Hermetic texts that survive today, fragments of that ancient doctrine, speak the same language as Atlantis. As above, so below, as within, so without. It is the formula of correspondence, the very heart of the Atlantean worldview, that the cosmos and the human soul mirror one another, that the universe is alive, conscious, and cyclical. From Egypt, this hidden current flowed into Greece, where it became the foundation of the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic initiations, and the teachings of Pythagoras and Plato himself. Pythagoras, according to ancient tradition, studied for 22 years in Egypt, learning geometry, music, and the harmony of the spheres, a science said to come from before the flood. He taught that number is divine, that the universe is built on mathematical proportion, another echo of the Atlantean understanding of cosmic order. In later centuries, this same current resurfaced among the Druids, the Magi, the Gnostics, and the alchemists of the Renaissance. Each claimed to preserve fragments of a primordial wisdom, a Prisca Theologia, passed down from the first civilization. Alchemy, for instance, was never truly about transmuting lead into gold. It was about transforming matter into spirit, ignorance into illumination. the journey from chaos to order, death to rebirth, the same journey that Atlantis itself had lived. Even in Mesoamerica, the Toltec and Maya priesthoods maintained secret astronomical calendars and initiatory rites remarkably similar to those of Egypt. In the Andes, the Amautas, sages of the Inca, claimed descent from the men of the dawn who preserved the laws of balance and harmony. Everywhere, the same impulse persisted: protect the knowledge, hide it from corruption, pass it on in code. That code was geometry, symbol, and myth. The triangle, the serpent, the eye within the pyramid. These were not random religious icons. They were keys, reminders of the unity between heaven, earth, and the soul. And though the original empire was gone, the Atlantean code survived in silence. It lived in the proportions of temples, in the architecture of cathedrals, in the layout of sacred cities aligned with the stars. It lived in the mottos of the alchemists, in the symbols of the mystics, and in the visions of philosophers who dreamed of a lost golden age of wisdom and light. To them, Atlantis was not merely a place, it was a state of consciousness, a level of awareness humanity once reached, then lost, and has been trying to recover ever since. The mystery schools understood this. They did not seek to rebuild the lost continent in stone. They sought to rebuild it within the human mind, to awaken the memory of what we once were before the flood of time drowned our understanding. But to find the last traces of the Atlantean code, we must leave the temples and look again to the earth itself, to the hidden chambers, the buried vaults, and the forbidden discoveries that suggest the ancient knowledge was not only spiritual, but technological. The lost technology, evidence of forgotten science and engineering. If the Atlanteans were real, then their greatest secret was not their temples nor their legends. It was their technology. Not technology in the modern sense of metal and electricity, but a science of nature, the mastery of energy, vibration, and matter. So advanced it blurred the boundary between physics and spirituality. Every ancient site that defies explanation seems to whisper the same truth. Our ancestors knew something we have forgotten. Take Baalbek in Lebanon, where 3 foundation stones, each weighing over 1,000 tons, rest perfectly aligned. Modern cranes could not lift them. How were they moved, carved, and placed with millimeter precision thousands of years ago? No inscriptions explain it. No tools have been found. Yet the stones are there, silent, deliberate, impossible. In Egypt, the precision of the Great Pyramid still astonishes engineers. Its base is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree. Its sides measure the curvature of the Earth, and its proportions encode both the dimensions of the planet and the mathematics of pi. Inside, the granite blocks of the king's chamber show evidence of resonance tuning, acoustic frequencies that amplify sound in harmonic intervals. Some researchers believe the chambers were not tombs, but energy resonators, devices that harnessed natural frequencies of the Earth itself. In Peru and Bolivia, at Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman, stone surfaces appear as if cut by high-speed saws or melted by intense heat. Tool marks consistent with ultrasonic cutting, a technology not rediscovered until the modern era, have been identified by engineers studying the blocks. Could it be that the Atlanteans possessed a form of energy manipulation? A lost science based not on combustion or circuitry, but on sound, magnetism, and geometry? Ancient texts seem to hint at this. The Vedic hymns of India describe flying machines called vimanas, powered by vibrating mercury engines. The Book of Enoch speaks of lights that moved through the firmament. The Egyptian hieroglyphs of Dendera depict what appear to be electrical bulbs connected to coiled cables, known today as the Dendera lights. Even Plato's own writings mention that Atlantis possessed an abundance of orichalcum, a mysterious metal that shone like fire and was second only to gold in value. Recent excavations off the coast of Sicily uncovered ingots of a copper-zinc alloy chemically similar to that mythical orichalcum, possibly remnants of the same metallurgical mastery. But the question is not just what they built, it's how they thought. The Atlantean worldview, preserved in hermetic fragments, saw the universe as a web of frequency. Matter was not solid, but vibrational, and by tuning into those vibrations, one could shape reality. This is the same principle modern quantum physics would rediscover millennia later, that everything in existence is energy, vibrating at different frequencies. Perhaps the so-called technology of the gods was not mechanical at all. Perhaps it was harmonic, a union of sound, light, and geometry. Consider Stonehenge, Karnak, Machu Picchu, and Teotihuacan, all aligned not only to celestial bodies, but also to telluric lines, the energetic veins of the Earth. Could these sites have formed a global grid, a network designed to balance planetary energy, prevent seismic instability, or even amplify consciousness? Modern scientists may hesitate, but ancient builders clearly knew something about resonance, magnetism, and planetary geometry that we are only beginning to rediscover. And perhaps this knowledge, the manipulation of energy through sound and stone, was the very heart of Atlantis's greatness and its downfall. Because if they learned to harness the natural forces of the Earth itself, then losing control of that power could have triggered the same cataclysms that destroyed them. The flood, the fire, the earthquakes. What if they weren't acts of divine punishment, but the result of technological overreach, a civilization that touched the fabric of nature itself and tore it? Such an idea may sound like myth, but then again, so did the atom until it was split. The deeper we dig into the ruins, the more it feels as though we are chasing our own reflection, rediscovering the same dangerous knowledge that our ancestors once mastered and lost. And if that knowledge was truly Atlantean, it did not vanish entirely. It went underground, hidden by the few who survived, waiting for a time when humanity would be ready to receive it again. The vaults of the earth, hidden archives, and the search for the Hall of Records. If Atlantis truly fell, its knowledge did not sink entirely with it. According to the ancient initiates, the last priests of the island foresaw the coming destruction, and before the flood came, they acted. They gathered their scrolls, their instruments, their charts of the heavens, and sealed them in secret vaults deep within the earth. These would become known throughout legend as the Halls of Records, the libraries of the first civilization. For centuries, this has been one of history's greatest riddles. From Egypt to Tibet, from the Yucatan to Antarctica, whispers of buried archives persist. Places said to contain the full memory of Atlantis, its science, its history, and the story of humanity before the flood. The most famous of these is beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza. In 1934, the clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, sometimes called the Sleeping Prophet, claimed that a hidden chamber lay under the Sphinx's paw, containing records of Atlantis and its connection to Egypt. Cayce predicted that this chamber would be discovered when the time of awakening had come. For decades, the idea was dismissed as fantasy. But in the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar studies by independent researchers and by teams from the University of Florida and the Egyptian Antiquities Organization revealed anomalous cavities beneath the Sphinx. Perfectly rectangular voids, symmetrical, and unexplained. The Egyptian government later restricted further exploration, citing preservation concerns. Was it coincidence or silence by design? Ancient Egyptian texts themselves speak of the vaults of Thoth, repositories of divine knowledge hidden to protect mankind from misuse. One papyrus fragment describes Thoth as saying, "I hid my secrets within the heart of the lion." The Sphinx, the lion of the horizon, could quite literally be that heart, and Egypt is not alone. In the highlands of Tibet, Buddhist monks guard tales of Shambhala, a hidden city beneath the mountains, a place of radiant light where knowledge from the previous age was preserved until humanity was ready to receive it again. In Mesoamerica, the Maya legends tell of Xibalba, the underworld of knowledge accessed through caves and cenotes, vast underground passages that lead to chambers of the gods. Recent explorations beneath Chichen Itza and Teotihuacan have uncovered enormous sealed tunnels lined with mica and pyrite, materials with conductive properties. Some archaeologists suggest they were ritual passages. Others suspect something far more technological. And in Antarctica, satellite images and ice-penetrating radar have revealed massive anomalies, geometric structures buried beneath miles of ice near the mountains of Queen Maud Land. Could one of the Atlantean refugees have been buried there, frozen in time since the last pole shift? All these sites, though separated by oceans and cultures, are united by a single idea, that Earth itself is the archive, a planet that remembers. Even in the writings of Plato, the priests of Sais told Solon that the story of Atlantis was preserved in the sanctuaries of the earth. They did not mean libraries. They meant places of power, nodes in the planetary grid where knowledge was stored not just in stone, but in resonance, vibration, and geometry. The halls of records might not be rooms at all. They could be energy vaults, designed to activate when human consciousness reached a certain frequency, when we, as a species, were ready to understand what was hidden. Perhaps that is what Casey meant by the time of awakening. Perhaps the vaults are not meant to be opened by tools, but by awareness, by rediscovering the same harmony the Atlanteans once held between science and spirit. Still, the physical evidence cannot be ignored. From unexplored chambers beneath the Sphinx, to sealed tunnels under the pyramids of Teotihuacan, to forbidden regions of Antarctica, the Earth hides more than it reveals. If the Atlantean legacy truly lies beneath our feet, then we are living atop the ruins of our own forgotten origins. And perhaps, just perhaps, when the final vault is opened, it will not only reveal who the Atlanteans were, it will reveal who we are. But before that moment comes, one last question remains. If their knowledge was so powerful, why did they hide it? And could its rediscovery change, or even end, our civilization once again? The forbidden legacy. Why Atlantis was erased from history. Civilizations do not vanish by chance. When a world falls, its ruins sink beneath the sea, but its memory is buried by design. If Atlantis truly existed, its destruction was only the first death. The second was silence. Every myth that speaks of the flood also speaks of a deliberate erasure, as though the survivors feared that what they once knew could destroy them again. Knowledge, in the wrong hands, becomes power, and power, unchecked, becomes ruin. Perhaps that is why the Atlanteans, or their descendants, hid their science behind temples and parables. Perhaps that is why, when new civilizations rose from the mud, the knowledge was divided, fragmented, and veiled, turned into religion, ritual, and secret doctrine. From the first dynasties of Egypt to the philosophical academies of Greece, hints of a forbidden past appear and vanish like ghosts in the archives. Plato was not the only one who spoke of an age before history. Herodotus mentioned the pillars of the sun, built by a race long lost. Manetho, the Egyptian priest, wrote of divine kings who ruled for thousands of years before the first human pharaoh. Even the Hebrew Bible, rewritten after the Babylonian exile, preserves echoes of pre-flood civilizations. The Nephilim, giants of old, men of renown. And yet, all of it was branded myth. During the rise of classical science and organized religion, the idea of a prehistorical advanced world became dangerous. For the theologians, it contradicted divine creation. For the rationalists, it contradicted the linear model of progress. In both cases, it had to be erased. Throughout the Middle Ages, Hermetic writings, those that traced their origin to Thoth, the supposed Atlantean sage, were banned, burned, or rewritten. The Library of Alexandria, which may have held the last scrolls referencing the island empire beyond the sea, was consumed by fire. In Mesoamerica, the chronicles of the Maya and Aztecs were destroyed by conquistadors who feared their cosmic cycles contradicted Christian time. In the Andes, Incan knowledge of pre-Diluvian ages was outlawed by the Spanish crown. Bit by bit, the memory of Atlantis was exiled from history, reduced to a fable of moral decay instead of a record of human potential. But what if that erasure was not mere coincidence? What if some part of humanity, perhaps those who inherited fragments of the Atlantean knowledge, chose to hide it? Consider this: the mystery schools of Egypt, the Orphic orders of Greece, the Rosicrucians, the alchemists, all guarded the same principle. Truth must be concealed from the profane until the world is ready. To them, ignorance was protection. The misuse of knowledge had already destroyed one world. Revealing it again prematurely could destroy another. Even today, the deeper we probe into ancient anomalies, the stronger the resistance becomes. Archaeological sites closed without explanation, findings reclassified, artifacts that vanish from museums or reappear in private collections. The pattern is not random. Perhaps the guardians of this legacy, or their modern inheritors, still walk among us, ensuring that certain doors remain closed until the next cycle demands their opening. If that sounds like fantasy, consider the irony. Plato's own students, and later the Roman Church, canonized only those of his works that supported a moral or political agenda. His cosmological dialogues, those that hinted at ancient sciences, celestial cycles, and the fall of older races, were sidelined, quietly archived, or labeled allegory. Atlantis became a story, and stories can be dismissed. But buried beneath that dismissal lies the greatest paradox of all. By calling it myth, humanity ensured its survival. Only in the guise of legend could the truth endure the censorship of time. Perhaps that was the Atlanteans' plan all along, to hide their knowledge in a tale so unbelievable that only the open-minded would ever seek it. Because what was once forbidden is now returning. Every new satellite scan, every sonar anomaly, every unexplainable ruin forces us to ask again the question Plato asked 24 centuries ago. What if it was real? And if it was, what else have we forgotten? The answer may not be found in the past, but in the future, in the rising tide of discovery that is slowly bringing Atlantis back into the light. The return of the lost world, modern discoveries, and the awakening of memory. The silence is ending. After 12,000 years of burial, the Earth is beginning to speak again, through satellites, sonar, and science itself. In the last few decades, discoveries once dismissed as fantasy have begun to emerge from the shadows, forcing historians, geologists, and archaeologists to confront an unsettling truth. We know far less about our past than we thought. When satellite LiDAR peeled back the canopy of the Amazon rainforest, it revealed vast geometric earthworks, cities, roads, and pyramidal mounds stretching for miles. When underwater drones mapped the Caribbean basin, they detected symmetrical patterns buried deep beneath layers of silt, the faint outlines of what could only be ancient architecture. And when ice-penetrating radar scanned Antarctica, it exposed colossal structures beneath the frozen surface, sharp-edged formations and rectangular ridges impossible to explain as natural glaciers. Each new revelation blurs the line between myth and history. Each discovery, another whisper from a forgotten world. In Turkey, the excavation of Göbekli Tepe continues to overturn the conventional model of civilization. Its builders were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers, yet they carved and transported megaliths weighing 50 tons with engineering that would not be seen again for thousands of years. At Karahan Tepe, its twin site nearby, new chambers have been unearthed, featuring carved serpents, geometric alignments, and altars cut from living rock. The precision is staggering, the symbolism unmistakable. Archaeologists now admit something happened around 9,600 BCE, something that forced humanity to remember faster, to rebuild sooner, to start again with knowledge it should not have had. Meanwhile, oceanographic surveys along the Azores Plateau and the Madeira Abyssal Plain continue to show sedimentary anomalies, evidence of massive rapid submersion events at the exact time Plato dated Atlantis's fall. Geologists studying these layers find signs of heat, volcanic ash, and sudden tectonic collapse, a geological fingerprint of cataclysm. And in the digital age, the floodgates have opened. Independent researchers, armed with open-source satellite data, have begun to map entire underwater landscapes, former river deltas, mountain ranges, and coastlines now hundreds of feet below the sea. Some show geometric regularity, perfect rectangles, 90-degree angles, concentric circles buried beneath marine sediments. Coincidence or cartographic confession? Even within academia, resistance is softening. Once taboo subjects like catastrophic flooding, rapid crustal displacement, and cometary impacts are now openly discussed in peer-reviewed journals. Terms like Younger Dryas boundary, once limited to geology, are now spoken in the same breath as Plato's Atlantis. The paradigm is shifting, but perhaps the most profound discovery is not in the soil or the sea. It is in us. Anthropologists and geneticists are tracing human migrations through DNA, revealing that advanced populations moved across the world far earlier than previously believed. Evidence of navigation, shared myths, and even similar cranial features appear in places separated by entire oceans. The implication is staggering. Ancient contact, perhaps from a single-source civilization, spreading culture, knowledge, and bloodlines after the Great Flood. Atlantis is returning, not as an island rising from the sea, but as an idea rising in human consciousness. Each discovery acts like a key, unlocking something deep within us, a memory older than writing, older than language, because maybe the story of Atlantis was never just history. Maybe it was ancestry. Perhaps we are their descendants, the children of the survivors, carrying their memory in our myths, their symbols in our DNA, their longing for lost perfection in our collective soul. And maybe the reason the story will not die, the reason it keeps surfacing again and again in every age of discovery, is because it is calling us back. Not to rebuild the same empire of pride and stone, but to remember what they forgot. The balance between power and harmony, between science and soul. Now, as our own civilization stands at the edge of technological godhood, we face the same crossroads. Will we repeat Atlantis's fate, or fulfill its promise? Because the lost world is no longer lost. It is awakening in the seas, in the earth, and within ourselves. The eternal echo, Atlantis, the mirror of humanity. The story of Atlantis is not about an island. It is about us. For 12,000 years, it has lingered at the edge of human memory, a song half remembered, a warning half heard. Empires have risen and fallen, continents have shifted, languages have died, and yet this one story has endured. Why? Because Atlantis is not just a place in time. It is a cycle, a reflection of what happens when knowledge surpasses wisdom, when civilization forgets its balance with nature, and when the fire of creation becomes the fire of destruction. Plato's tale was never simply about geography. It was about the soul of humanity, the eternal struggle between light and shadow, between reason and pride. In every age, we rebuild Atlantis in new forms, our cities of glass and metal, our machines that reshape nature, our pursuit of power that touches the stars but forgets the earth. We are them, the heirs of their brilliance and the inheritors of their blindness. The evidence of their existence surrounds us, in the ruins that defy time, in the myths that mirror one another across oceans, in the mathematics of ancient temples and the celestial alignments of monuments built by hands that should not have known such precision. And most of all, in our unending search for origins, that quiet ache that drives explorers, philosophers, and dreamers to keep digging, keep asking, keep remembering. Perhaps that longing is the last voice of Atlantis within us, the echo of a civilization that refused to die. Modern science, whether it knows it or not, is retracing Atlantean footsteps, mapping the heavens, harnessing invisible forces, seeking the code of creation itself. But with every discovery, the question grows louder. Will we remember their mistake? The Atlanteans, according to Plato, fell not because they lacked knowledge, but because they lost humility. They forgot that technology without wisdom becomes destruction, that mastery without harmony breeds ruin. The flood that ended their world was not only water, it was consequence. And now, as the ice melts again, as the seas rise, and as humanity's reach stretches beyond the earth, the cycle seems to turn once more. The warning of the ancients echoes through time: balance or perish. Yet there is hope in the echo, because if the story of Atlantis has survived this long, it means we have not yet stopped listening. We are remembering. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, we are remembering. Every discovery beneath the sea, every decoded symbol, every ancient alignment we finally understand, they are all fragments of the same awakening. Atlantis is not gone. It is returning, not as a city, but as consciousness, as the realization that the knowledge we seek was always within us. The ancients said that history moves in great cycles, that every fall is followed by rebirth. Perhaps we are standing at that threshold now, the dawn of a new Zep Tepi, a second, first time. The waves that once swallowed Atlantis now reflect our own world. Cities glitter above the sea like stars fallen to earth, fragile and proud. We too wield forces that can destroy or transform. We too stand before the same choice, to repeat the cycle or to transcend it. And maybe, just maybe, that is the true message the ocean has been trying to tell us all along. Atlantis was never meant to be found. It was meant to be remembered. Remembered not as ruins of the past, but as a mirror of the future. Because the real Atlantis was never beneath the waves. It has always been within the human heart, waiting for the moment when we are wise enough to rise again.